The illusion has finally and irrevocably shattered. For months, the Russian regime has insisted that its war effort is being sustained by a robust, all-volunteer professional army, that the continuous flow of contract soldiers is more than enough to cover the staggering casualties. That lie has now collapsed. The truth is screaming from the very ranks of Russia's most loyal supporters. The contract system is failing, and the only path forward, according to the military's own cheerleaders, is a massive new mobilization. This isn't just speculation, it is the overwhelming consensus now being voiced across every major Z channel and military blog. The pivot in the pro-war narrative is the most damning evidence of all. What was once the fringe cry of isolated critics has become the urgent, unanimous demand of the entire military community. They are openly demanding that the state grab a couple 100,000 men and send them to the front. This move is driven by three inescapable factors that prove the contract system is a bankrupt endeavor. First, the sheer volume of losses is simply overwhelming the intake rate. The pace of the war is too brutal, and the casualties are too high. The contract system, even with massive financial incentives, cannot meet the required quantity of manpower necessary to plug the gaping holes in the front line. The momentum of the war demands a constant, heavy flow of replacements, and the contract system is nothing more than a trickle. Second, the quality and morale of the recruits are in terminal decline. While the official line insists on high volunteer numbers, the reality is that the quality of these new soldiers is dangerously low. They are often ill-prepared, poorly motivated, and lack the basic training necessary for survival, let alone effectiveness, in the kind of high-intensity conflict now raging in Ukraine. The military is trading quality for quantity, a desperate exchange that only accelerates its rate of loss. The Z-bloggers are lamenting that they are losing a small number of hardened, long-serving professionals and replacing them with a larger number of ill-equipped, quickly trained men, a process that is actively lowering the overall combat power of the army. Third, and most critically, is the issue of exhaustion and rotation. The most experienced soldiers, the officers, the specialized units, and the initial wave of mobilized and contract forces have been fighting for 2, sometimes 3 years without a meaningful rotation. This has led to a profound level of chronic fatigue and moral collapse. The Z-bloggers point out that the political leadership, fearing social backlash, refuses to rotate these forces, choosing instead to sustain the war on the backs of a diminishing and demoralized corps. The contract system, therefore, is not functioning as a force multiplier. It is merely an unsustainable replacement service that is sacrificing its most valuable assets. This rising chorus demanding mobilization is a direct political challenge to the Kremlin. It forces the leadership to choose between a politically safe lie, the pretense that everything is fine and the volunteer resource is high, and a military necessity, admitting the truth and risking the social backlash of a massive compulsory draft. The simple fact is that the military needs a systemic, sustained solution to its manpower crisis, and the contract system, built on a foundation of political denial, is a complete and catastrophic failure. The war has reached a point where the only way to sustain the fighting is to turn the entire country into a military factory, and the Z-bloggers, by demanding mobilization, are the ones forcing that uncomfortable reality into the public square.
We have established that the contract system is a catastrophic failure. But to fully grasp the depth of Russia's dilemma, we must confront the tactical reality that is now dictating policy in the Kremlin. The simple fact is that Russia cannot win this war without a massive new mobilization. The strategic goals of occupying Ukraine are now directly colliding with the brutally efficient reality of the modern battlefield. And the only solution the military command sees is to compensate for tactical incompetence with sheer, overwhelming numbers. The evidence for this is now overwhelming, coming not from Western intelligence, but from the internal assessments of Russia's most loyal military commentators. The demand for a 2 million-man army, a figure widely circulated among pro-war analysts, is not a sign of hyperbole. It is a terrifyingly frank admission that the current force is fundamentally insufficient. To conquer and hold a country the size of Ukraine, and to break a defense that has proven to be adaptable and technologically proficient, requires an immense force. A minimum of 700,000 to 900,000 men actively committed to the front lines. This is the only number that can guarantee victory, and the current army is nowhere near it. This positional stalemate is the direct result of a fundamental tactical failure. Russia's grand offensive plans proved that gradual attrition-based advances are unsustainable. The entire front has seized up, turning into a bloody, exhausting deadlock. The primary reason for this stalemate is the complete dominance of the FPV drone. The FPV drone has fundamentally negated Russia's key military advantage, its vast superiority in armor. The drone artillery complex on the Ukrainian side has created a continuous, lethal kill zone that instantly identifies and destroys any large target that moves. This is why Russia's old tactics are now utterly obsolete. The era of the tank column and the battalion-level breakthrough is over. These traditional assaults are now seen not as an effective tactic, but as a suicidal gesture. A column of armored vehicles is simply a mass target waiting for a drone swarm. And because FPV drones are cheap, ubiquitous, and precise, the cost of a traditional assault has become astronomically high. The only way to break this stalemate, according to military sources, is through a brute force compensation. A force so massive that it can sustain catastrophic FPV losses while maintaining continuous pressure. The current tactic of relying on small group infiltration is a testament to this tactical dead end. While small groups are harder to hit and can penetrate the gaps in Ukraine's defense, they lack the momentum and the firepower to achieve a strategic breakthrough. They are paying a high price for meters, not miles, and this slow, painful attrition is consuming Russia's remaining professional forces. This is why the call for a new draft is so desperate. The General Staff knows the FPV drone is a tactical roadblock, and the only solution they see is to throw an overwhelming, endless number of men into the machine to absorb the drone strikes and keep moving forward. This tactical dilemma now directly connects to the political paralysis in the Kremlin. The military leadership understands the FPV drone is the problem, and the only solution is mass, brute force. The necessity for a new draft is not a secret, it's a strategic imperative. The fact that the leadership is still hesitant to call for a new draft is proof that the political risk of social chaos is seen as greater than the military necessity, even with the strategic goal of conquering Ukraine at stake. The military requires an impossible solution, a large army, and the government is too weak to provide it.
We have established the military necessity for a new draft, but now we must confront the moral and logistical nightmare that is actively preventing it. The Russian army is suffering from a massive, self-inflicted internal crisis that goes far beyond a simple lack of manpower. This is a systemic collapse, where bureaucratic incompetence and moral failure have created a service environment so toxic that a new mobilization would actually make the army weaker, not stronger. The first and most immediate crisis is a moral and legal one, the issue of perpetual service. Tens of thousands of experienced soldiers, the very backbone of the army, including those initially mobilized and those on short-term contracts, are being held illegally at the front. Their contracts have expired, but they are denied rotation and discharge, often with no legal recourse. This has created a vast pool of demoralized, exhausted, and angry soldiers who feel betrayed by the state they served. This moral injury poses an immense risk. Should a new, massive mobilization be announced, this core of combat-hardened veterans who possess invaluable knowledge and experience could stage a mass exodus. They would take their knowledge and their bitterness with them, leaving the army weaker, less professional, and far more prone to failure. The regime, in its fear of admitting the war's true cost, has created a legal and moral limbo that is actively destroying its own professional core. This moral crisis is compounded by a catastrophic logistical failure. The military-industrial complex is fundamentally incapable of equipping a modern army for 21st century warfare. The most desperate needs of the army are not being met by the state.
Z-bloggers and frontline personnel are screaming about the critical shortages that prove this systemic rot. The drone deficit. Troops desperately lack basic tactical FPV drones, electronic warfare systems, and anti-drone detection gear, the fundamental tools required to survive the current conflict. They are fighting a drone war without the drones. The basic gear crisis. Beyond the high-tech systems, soldiers lack basic survival gear, including modern body armor, reliable field communications, and adequate first aid kits. Recruits are often issued outdated helmets and basic firearms with insufficient magazines. This reflects a state that has failed to provide even the minimum standard of protection for its soldiers. The training farce. The problem is amplified by a profound lack of training. New contract recruits are rushed through bare-bones training cycles, often just a matter of weeks, that barely cover basic skills. There is a universal consensus among the Z community that the training is utterly inadequate, a tragic situation that guarantees new recruits are sent to the front highly expendable and profoundly unprepared. The ultimate irony of this collapse is that the Russian army has been reduced to a charity organization. The evidence shows that the army is not sustained by the state, but by the self-sacrifice of its own people. Z-bloggers openly admit that the essential life-saving gear, the thermal optics, the medical supplies, the drones, and the anti-drone equipment is acquired through private donations and the soldiers' own paychecks. This reliance on a people's army to equip itself is a damning indictment of the Russian state, proving that its massive military budget is a lie built on corruption and inefficiency. Any new mobilization would simply require the public to buy uniforms, drones, and medical supplies for hundreds of thousands of new untrained recruits. The state is asking its people to pay for the war twice, once with their taxes and once with their generosity. The systemic rot has trapped the Russian leadership in a vicious cycle. They desperately need a new draft, but they are physically incapable of equipping and training the new recruits for a modern war. The only guaranteed outcome of a new mobilization would be a mass influx of untrained, ill-equipped men, who would only accelerate the casualty rate and drain the public's financial reserves, proving once again that the Russian military is more adept at fighting its own internal contradictions than its external enemies. We've established the chaos on the civilian streets, but for a military expert, the most critical part of this fuel crisis is its direct, devastating impact on the Russian army's ability to fight. This isn't just a political embarrassment, it's a strategic attack on the most vulnerable link in their entire supply chain, a military victory achieved without firing a single shot on the front line. The crisis is not just inconveniencing the Russian population, it is bleeding the Russian military dry. The key to understanding this threat is to debunk the persistent diesel myth. The common assumption is that the Russian military is immune to gasoline shortages because its heavy armor, the tanks, the infantry fighting vehicles, and the heavy artillery runs on diesel fuel. That is correct, but it is also a fatal oversight. The heavy equipment fights the war of the last century. The true weapons of this war are fought and powered by gasoline. This is a conflict dominated by the drone artillery complex, and that complex cannot function without a constant, reliable supply of high-octane fuel. Think about the components of a modern Russian fighting position and what runs on gasoline. It is the drones, the FPV kamikazes, the reconnaissance drones, and the generators that charge their batteries that are the eyes and the immediate striking power of the Russian army. A drone operator cannot fly a mission if their generator is silent. A field command post loses its communication when its backup generator runs dry. And most critically, the light vehicles and pickup trucks, often donated by volunteers, that are essential for the rapid movement of personnel, wounded, and high-value equipment near the front line, all run on gasoline. When the civilian gas stations close, the military's forward-most logistics, the critical small logistics, cease to function. This turns a domestic problem into a strategic military advantage for Ukraine. The crisis doesn't stop a T-90 tank 300 kilometers away, but it stops the flow of intelligence, the quick evacuation of the wounded, and the ability to counter an attack with drones. This turns a tactical problem into a strategic one. The profound systemic failure revealed by this crisis is that the Russian military is forcing its own soldiers to fight for fuel. Reports from the ground confirm that Russian troops are competing with civilians in queues or are forced to buy fuel on the black market at exorbitant prices. This is not just a logistical hurdle, it is a breakdown of the state's most fundamental duty, to supply its army. When a soldier must use his own money to buy black market gasoline to charge the battery of the drone that is supposed to save his life, it is a testament to the fact that the entire system has collapsed. This breakdown in morale and supply is the final, undeniable proof that the campaign of kinetic sanctions is one of the most effective strategic weapons of this war. The crisis of gasoline, therefore, is a direct attack on the blood of the Russian military's logistical tail. It is a brilliant strategy that exploits the rigidity of a top-down authoritarian system. The war has forced Russia to prioritize its heavy industries, but the Ukrainian response has been to target the flexible, smaller systems that run the war of the 21st century. The resulting crisis is a direct threat to the army's ability to maintain its frontline operations, and it is a powerful indicator that the ultimate military defeat of Russia is not just a possibility, but an inevitability.
We have spent this time meticulously charting the internal decay of the Russian armed forces, from the catastrophic failure of the contract system to the moral hazard of perpetual service. Now, we arrive at the final, unavoidable conclusion. The war has entered its ultimate, decisive phase, and it is defined by a single, terrifying truth. Russia's defeat is no longer a possibility. It is a historical inevitability. The war will end not on the Kremlin's terms, but on Ukraine's, because the Russian military has been backed into a corner by its own systemic and political failures. The core of this final crisis is the mobilization contradiction. The military's own analysts, the Z-bloggers and insiders, have delivered the consensus verdict. Without a massive new draft, estimated at 700,000 to 900,000 men to sustain the front lines, victory is impossible. The current military structure is exhausted, running on the fumes of chronic fatigue and illegal retention. The system is consuming its professional core. The question facing the leadership is now binary and brutal: mobilize and risk massive domestic backlash and political instability, or refuse to mobilize and guarantee the slow, grinding loss of the war. This choice is the ultimate expression of the regime's weakness. A successful, sustainable totalitarian state would call for a total mobilization of its economy and its people. But the Russian leadership is so profoundly afraid of its own population, so committed to maintaining the illusion of a peaceful, normal life, that it would rather bleed its professional army to death than risk social revolt. This political cowardice is the final and fatal contradiction of the entire military campaign. They are sacrificing military effectiveness for political survival, a strategy that ensures they lose both the war and the respect of their own most loyal supporters. The impact of this internal failure is now being amplified by external pressure. The exposure of the Russian army's status as a paper tiger and the subsequent aggressive rhetoric from a key Western leader have aligned with the strategic interests of the West. The external pressure is accelerating the internal collapse. Russia can no longer count on slow attrition to win the war. It is now facing a new reality where its financial weakness and its logistical failures are being actively exploited. The inability to finance the war, the visible decay of the civilian economy, and the looming social crisis are all symptoms of a terminal event. The verdict has been delivered. The war will end not with a grand military maneuver, but with a systemic failure that makes continuation impossible. The victory will be secured not just because of Ukrainian bravery, but because the Russian war machine is being dismantled by its own internal contradictions. The final victory of Ukraine is close because the very foundation of the Russian military system, its manpower, its equipment, and its political will, has been irrevocably compromised. This is the new decree. The war is lost.